The story of Gagagigo is one that stretches back all the way to their youth, before they even started listening to the collected works of Lady Gaga. Gigobyte is a level 1 water reptile normal monster with 350 attack and 300 defense. He has a tranquil soul, but carries a destiny that one day his heart shall be tainted by evil. Pretty grim prophecy, but for now, he's the image of a rambunctious youth looking to make their mark on the world. Official Master Guide resources tell us that Gigabyte's parents were very proud of him and expected many great things of him in his future, though the young reptile met those expectations simply by living a carefree life, enjoying his free time as he saw fit from dusk to dawn, even getting into a few scrapes from time to time. He's described as a bit too naughty and spoiled, which I feel like is a lead-in to the darkness taking hold of his heart, but hot take here, I think kids should be allowed to be a little naughty and spoiled. They haven't reached a level of emotional maturity to handle those impulses. Tangent aside, let's get into the cards that make up this reptile's youth. First up, we have a few cards that show off Gigabyte's school pals, who were drafted into a play for their arts festival, and despite not getting the lead role, our little guy's gonna do their best to stand out. The Law of the Normal is a normal spell card that you can only activate while there are 5 face-up level 2 or lower normal monsters on your side of the field. Both players discard all cards in their hands and destroy all cards on the field, except level 2 or lower normal monsters. So hey, there's a payoff for sticking a bunch of ineffectual gremlins into your deck, ain't that something? But yeah, in most use cases, this card is just completely unusable. No deck in existence, save for one, has ever had the infrastructure to field that many bad monsters, so unless you have a very specific cube setup to encourage this, you aren't seeing a resolution of Gigabyte and friends anytime soon. Unless you're playing it in Dual Avatar, a deck whose primary power spell summons 5 level 2 tokens. Now, granted, it normally fusion summons those tokens together into actual threats, but if you forego that and just keep the tokens around, then yeah, you can hand rip and board wipe your opponent. So long as your graveyard cards from that point can keep you in the game, that's going to put you ahead. But those are some pretty nasty hoops to jump through, not least of which is being forced to run Dual Avatar. Ugh. The Return to the Normal is a normal trap card that you can activate when exactly one monster is normal or special summoned face up, except during the damage step, and it destroys all monsters on the field with less attack than that monster. That means it has nothing to do with normal monsters, so the flavor is pretty much out the window here. This is a funny card to have if you play a deck with really big monsters in it, especially if you don't like summoning backup dancers to help them out. After all, this does hit every other monster on the field, including the controllers. But you're a smart cookie, I'm sure you'll get the sequencing right. The funny thing to do is trigger it on your opponent's summon, because it doesn't check to see who summoned the monster. So if they land a big boss alongside their minions, you can clear out the riffraff if you so choose. And threading the needle is also an option. If you can summon a monster weaker than your other ones while still being bigger than your opponent's lineup, that's just pure value. But if you're that focused on optimal number placement, I think you'd be better served by playing Excel spreadsheets than Yu-Gi-Oh! Though now that I say it out loud, spreadsheets and Yu-Gi-Oh! Have a very torrid history, so might be more appropriate than I thought. The Revenge of the Normal is a normal trap card that special summons level 4 or lower monsters from your hand up to the number of monsters your opponent controls. Once again, you don't have to summon normal monsters with this, so I wonder why the normals are being brought in at all. Now, as someone who advocates for running Madolche Palooza in that deck, I think effects like this can be viable, but it needs to be in the right context. Madolches love recycling their cards back into their hand. They're primed to summon a bunch from the hand. Your deck probably doesn't have the level 4 roster or the infrastructure needed to ensure this happens consistently. And that's not even bringing in the endangerment of the whole thing. You can only summon in accordance with the amount of monsters your opponent has on the field, and if you think throwing a bunch of canonical children at a bunch of battle-hardened monsters is a good thing to be doing with your time, then you're not going to be having that deck for very long. Now, we can see that through all these previous cards, there's a bit of a through line. The budding theater troupe puts on a good show, are then crushed for getting out of line, and then try to take revenge, and eventually succeed in that with the Toil of the Normal, a normal trap card that applies a number of effects in sequence based on the number of normal monsters in your grave with different names, skipping over any that don't apply. With 1 or more this turn, normal monsters you control gain 800 attack. With 2 or more, negate the effects of an effect monster on the field until the end of the turn. With 3 or more this turn, normal monsters can't be destroyed by card effects. With 4 or more, shuffle an effect monster on the field into the deck, and with 5 or more, add a copy of the Toil of the Normal from your deck to your hand. Finally, we're back to having a of the normal card that requires normal monsters to function. And honestly, it's a little bananas. An 800 point boost for each normal monster is a pretty significant uptick, and with the very reasonable amount of 2 normals, should your deck involve them, adding a monster negate on top of that is pretty spiffy. And if you're gonna go all in on the card, well, Red Mage might need to give this card a once-over for any Magic Key synergies. Now, who am I kidding? Red Mage has probably already written a dissertation on all possible utilities here. The important thing, for our purposes, is that the normal monsters won! We can see the shadowy figure that Haniwa is standing on top of is one of the trio from Revenge of the Normal, showing that their mission for revengeance was successful, with Gigobyte giving us a sick congratulatory thumbs up for a battle well won. I'm also coming to the realization only now that Petite Dragon is part of this group, which also ends up being a familiar for the Charmers later on, so, small world, I guess. Triangle Power is a normal spell card that increases the original attack of all face-up level 1 normal monsters on your side of the field except tokens by 2,000 until the end phase, but it also destroys all level 1 normal monsters on your field during the end phase. This is a strange card in the timeline of Gigabyte, largely because of how much it makes all the sense and none of the sense. Like, it shows a path between the young Gigabyte and the eventual Gagagigo, but the boost doesn't make the young version match up to the older one, and it kinda implies that Gigabyte explodes afterwards, so the impact of the spell can't really be seen as canon if we want this in the timeline. Mechanically, at present, this encompasses 28 targets in the TCG, and unsurprisingly, their stats are bad. The best you can hope for is using it with Volcanic Rat or Shadow Spectre, which are both a sturdy 500 base attack, which will temporarily turn them into threats that'll make Dark Magician wondering if they're the ultimate wizard. Interestingly enough, it also adds to the monster's original attack. Now, largely that doesn't mean anything, but this does lead to some funny interactions. Monsters affected by Triangle Power won't be destroyed by Overwork, which checks to see if a monster has a higher attack than their original. Castle Gate can also do some massive burn damage that it otherwise wouldn't be able to due to the level limit, and the drawback of losing your monster at the end of the turn can be circumvented by attributing all the affected monsters for the summon of legendary Maju Garzette. Ironically, with cards like Tri-White, this works way better in decks like Skull Servant than anything Gigabyte focused, which feels very strange. And not just because Gigabyte is on the art, but because I didn't take the Gigabyte line for being such squares. This brings us to the end of the Gigabyte saga, but we actually have a very interesting series of cards that actually help bridge the gap from here to the teenage years. And that's all thanks to Aria, the Water Charmer. Now, I won't be going over Aria's cards here, largely because we already have a Charmer video on the channel. But the important thing to note is that her familiar of choice is Gigabyte. On her Charmer, Channeler, and Raging cards, you can see our little reptile posing alongside his partner, but on her familiar Possessed art, we see Gagagigo, or at least one of the 2 earlier variations of that monster. The first one is likely Awakening of the Possessed Gigobyte, likely showing the point where Gigabyte evolves, as well as Gigobyte, a great piece of extension for any spellcaster deck that likes level 4 monsters. Looking at you, Performages! Gigobyte also shows up in other support cards for the Charmers, including Unpossessed and Possessed partnerships. Once again, we won't be going over these cards mechanically, as the Charmer video does a good job of breaking down all that, but it's notable that we get to see Gigobyte transform from a little bratty baby into a powerful young gator creature, and this could inform a lot of their character moving forward. Gigabyte must have formed quite a bond with Aria as her familiar, connecting in ways both mundane and magical, but eventually we see Gigabyte being phased out as the familiar, being replaced by this blue fish creature. We haven't gotten an explanation for the separation, so we don't know if the two had a falling out, or if Gigobyte was taken by a stint of wanderlust and began adventuring alone. But we do have a clue, as the Master Guide 1 text states that, as Gagagigo, he gets into one fight after another, looking for a certain person due to the agonies of love. So he may have been chasing after someone. But I'd hazard a guess and say that no matter how the two separated, this could understandably leave an emptiness in Gigobyte's heart, a connection severed, a friend they could no longer lean on in times of trouble. Connection is going to be a very important theme coming up in the future sections, and the root of much of that can be found here. And, as I am obligated to remind everyone, because Gigobyte was a familiar of the Charmers, and Win is Winda's sister, the entire Gagagigo line and everything that comes after is dual terminal canon. Keep an eye out for Gagagigo the Risen to team up with the Gem Knights in the near future. With this, we move fully into the next stage of our beloved lizard's life cycle. Gagagigo was a level 4 water reptile monster with 1850 attack and 1000 defense. This young evildoer used to have an evil heart, but by meeting a special person, he discovered justice. That's right, our spoiled little brat learned how to become a hero! But not that kind. But to fully grasp how that came to pass, let's go through the events that brought them to this point. First up, we've got Stumbling, a continuous spell card that makes it so every monster that's normal, flip, or special summoned is changed to defense position. So if you wanted to slow the pace of the game down a bit, this would be a great way to do that. There's not a lot of context clues in the card as to how this interacts with Gagagigo's story, but we can look back to the Master Guide for an answer to this. What we have is Gagagigo, doubled over, lamenting the fact that the girl he was chasing didn't read the letter he had spent all night writing, and he never saw her again. Absolutely devastating. Though, seeing that the place you had this breakdown is in the Boneyard, I have to wonder, was that there before you had your crash out, or did you just polish off one of the world's biggest bone-in buffet meals? Because if so, I guess that explains why one of the skulls is trying to take a chomp back at you. Next up, we have Icepawn, a continuous trap card that triggers every time any number of non-water monsters are normal or special summoned while you control a water monster, changing them to defense position. Like a Stumbling that avoids water monsters, like Gagagigo. Looks like they learned their lesson from that experience, while the Goblin attack force is still trying to figure out how ice skates work. Fun card to add to Water Stun, though with how many tools that deck has at its disposal, I don't think a one-turn delay on the monster attacking is that relevant. This is pretty interesting from a timeline perspective because it's hard to pinpoint. I don't think it comes directly after Stumbling, but since this card and that card are both ambiguous, I wanted to cover them here before we handled some more concrete details. The best thing we can tell from all this is that Gagagigo had a brief stint where he was watching his fashion sense and got a killer winter jacket, which sadly never comes up again. This does, however, point to the fact that Gagagigo is a pretty tactical thinker. How does an 1850 attack monster beat a 2300 attack one? Simple. Invite him to an ice rink. That'll put him in a slippery situation. Now, one of the things that helps us smooth out the timeline is Gagagigo's interactions with Freed the Brave Wanderer. Several cards moving forward will show the two interacting, and the lore guide even says the two develop a fierce rivalry and friendship. The order of events is a little strange, but I think it goes a little something like this. First up is Dimensional Prison, a normal trap card that can be triggered when an opponent's monster declares an attack. It targets that attacking monster and banishes it. A brief aside, let's all take a moment to remember that this was, for a long time, a very common competitive staple. When combat removal was the most reliable way to clear threats, having this in your back row was a great comfort. Now, given how the art is composed, with Freed seemingly in the bracing stance while Gagagigo is out there throwing a punch, I think it's safe to say that the lizard is the one tumbling into the void. What caused it? Beats me, but until we get a card that shows off someone wielding a dimensional rift generator, it's probably just random happenstance. This separates the rivals, putting them on two different planes of existence, but that doesn't mean they can't communicate. DD Borderline is a continuous spell card that prevents both players from conducting their battle phase while there are no spell cards in your own grave. Very strange stall card, but sure, have fun with it. This card shows Freed and Gagagigo on opposite sides of a dimensional barrier. Put a pin in that one, and at the very least, they can see each other. And if light can pass through, perhaps sound waves can as well. Without being able to fight one another, they'd be forced to talk if they were standing around staring at each other, and so they would gain a deeper understanding of each other. Perhaps this is where Gagagigo comes to learn about fighting for justice, and not to just cover up a wounded heart. With this memory in his heart, Gagagigo attempts to find a way home, and does so, though perhaps sooner than he might have intended. Premature Return is a normal trap card that banishes a card from your hand, then targets one of your banished monsters and special summons it in face-down defense position. A funny card if your deck runs a lot of banishing effects, though a pretty slow one to actually get any value from since the summoned monster has to come out face down. And we see a lot of familiar different dimension faces here too. DD Crazy Beast and Goblin Trainer, Night Day Greffer, Esper Girl, that's gonna be wild to tie into things, and Gagagigo, distinguishable from their younger self thanks to their more pronounced facial features and longer limbs, despite the chibification. Once again, can't really tell how on purpose this event is, but given Premature was part of the name, I imagine it wasn't part of any plans. Once he returned to the same dimension as Freed, Gagagigo tracked down the warrior's army in hopes of joining them, and he had a very easy scent to latch onto, because one of the soldiers, Marauding Captain, was cooking up a mean meal in Marmiting Captain, a level 3 Earth Warrior monster with 1200 attack and 400 defense, and when this card is normal summoned, you can shuffle one card from your hand into the deck, then draw a card. Then you can special summon it if it's a monster. So basically, the captain is throwing some ingredients into the pot, and you always get something back for it, the meal, but if it attracts a monster, you get to bring it to the field. And we can draw a connection between that effect, these monsters, and Gagagigo, because if you look way back in the tree line, you'll see Gagagigo, whose mouth is watering over that stew. And honestly, I'm with him, that looks great. But this does introduce a bit of a continuity issue that I can't quite pin down. The Freed we see in this art is of the older Matchless General variety, not the younger Brave Warrior. As you can see that all of the Brave Wanderer's peach fuzz has come together to form a pretty stellar stash. But we know that this takes place before a future card, Draining Shield, because that features a future Gagagigo, squaring off against Brave Wanderer Freed, so I'm going to pretend that this is just Brave Warrior suffering the effects of the captain's manly cooking. Just instead of putting hair on his chest, it was on his lip. And so that's how Gagagigo joins the crew. But considering the Big Lizard doesn't show up in many of the other group's teamwork cards, their meeting might be short-lived, due to the events of Altar for Tribute, a normal trap card that selects a monster on your side of the field and sends it to the grave to increase your life points by an amount equal to the original attack of the monster. Now, this is a bit of an odd placement considering that this implies the monster is sacrificed to absorb its power and enhance your life points, but to be fair, since we still have a lot of Gagagigo cards to go, it doesn't fit in well anywhere. So I'd like to propose a different interpretation. We know Gagagigo has a dark heart, and later material will imply that he's been brainwashed, before making that implication out and out text. So if this altar is instead meant to unleash his inner darkness, the tribute might be something else meant to empower him. Then it makes a lot more sense. But who would do something like that? Well, once again, given information we learn later on, this is likely done by denizens of the Demon Realm, specifically those associated with Kozaki, who carries out a number of unethical experiments on monsters. And speaking of which, one such experiment is showcased in Two-Man Cell Battle, a continuous spell card that, during each player's end phase, lets the turn player special summon a level 4 normal monster from their hand. The good news is that your opponent is probably never going to benefit from this, despite it being reciprocal. The bad news is that you're summoning a normal monster during your end phase, which doesn't mean much of anything. However, it's the art that's most important here. Woodborg Impachi is introduced to this tale in the form of Blazing Impachi, a card that can go toe-to-toe with Gagagigo since they share the same attack power. Now, judging from the spell's effect, we can deduce that the two men in the cell battle is Blazing Impachi and Gagagigo, since they fit the bill of the effect. And they also have another thing in common. When this battle is over, both will become test subjects for Kozaki. Impachi will go on to burn out before being rebuilt, but for our reptile buddy, his fate is far, far worse. But while the battle is going, marauding Captain is here to save the day, and may have even saved the lizard from a fatal blow, as seen in the spell card, My Body as a Shield. A quick play spell card that you can activate when your opponent activates a spell card, trap card, or monster effect that would destroy any number of monsters on the field. You pay 1500 life points to negate the activation, and if you do, destroy it. Now, the placement of this card is a little tricky. The fiery beam that's being blocked here could come from Blazing Impachi, but could also be just any number of generic blasts done before this specific battle to grow their camaraderie. But once again, the Master Guidebook has some info to tell us. A snippet that covers why I think Gagagigo is not only brainwashed by darkness here, but was actually a member of Freed's army. Marauding Captain actually gets their own section in that very same book, and it states right next to the image of My Body as a Shield, he discovered that one of his men had been brainwashed by the enemy. Though the soldier was now his enemy, his burning sense of chivalry compelled him to take the blow and save that guy from a terrible fate, even at the cost of his own body. So, there it is. A former ally turned evil being saved by an act of self-sacrifice. So perhaps it is maybe this moment that teaches Gagagigo what real justice is, and gave him another chance to seal away his own darkness. But this 2-on-1 battle would be evened out pretty quickly, as Invader of Darkness would show up to support Blazing Impachi, as shown in the card, Unified Front. A normal trap card that has you discarding a monster, then targeting a face-up monster on the field, and its attack and defense become the discarded monster's attack and defense until the end of the turn, and monsters you control can't attack directly during the turn you activate this card. This actually has an interesting amount of utility. The initial idea might be to pitch a big monster in your hand to buff one of your own monsters to punch over the opposition, but this can affect any monster on the field, including your opponents, meaning you can pitch a really small monster in response to their attack, and all of a sudden, you've flipped the script on how the battle was supposed to go. Next up, we have a bit of a two-parter. Invader of Darkness fires off a shining beam of energy intended for another, unnamed soldier, who is presumably part of Freed's army, and Gagagigo is given a chance to show what he's learned about the tenets of chivalry from the marauding captain. It starts out in Absolute End, a normal trap card that you can only activate during your opponent's turn, and during that turn, attacks from your opponent's monsters become direct attacks. This can give you a cheeky way to avoid getting your monsters run over in battle by blocking the attacks with your face. So whether you want to keep your little creatures safe or you're desperate to lose some life points, this is the card for you. Now, Invader of Darkness's attack isn't being directed at the unnamed soldier yet, likely culling some other hapless mooks from off screen, but that ire eventually lands on this cowering cavalryman, and that's when Gagagigo steps in to take the hit. And that's shown in Spirit Barrier, a continuous trap card that prevents you from taking damage while you control a monster. This works particularly well with Absolute End, as this keeps your monster safe while also preserving your life points, though can also just help prevent you from taking damage from battles altogether by itself, which means it makes for a funny tech card in Cloudians. After all, they can be destroyed in battle, so you'll always never be taking damage. And as you can see, the heroism demonstrated by Gagagigo has manifested, both in deed and in power, providing a shield to protect the weak, but not without a cost. While the direct aftermath of the battle is a bit of a mystery, the only other card that features our brave lizard is Level Conversion Lab, a normal trap card that has you selecting a monster in your hand and showing it to your opponent. Then, you roll a 6-sided die. If you roll a 1, you send the selected monster to the graveyard, but on a 2 through 6, the level of the selected monster becomes equal to the result until the end of the turn, which is actually kinda cool. You have a 50% chance of making any monster normal summonable without a tribute, summoning condition restrictions notwithstanding. If the monster is big enough, even a 5 or 6 could still be a discount, with 1 being your only bad result. It's not a good effect, but a fun piece of jank to be sure. In the art, we can see Gagagigo suspended in a tank, being looked over by Kazaki, surrounded by pieces of custom-built armor. It's also notable that the screens show that the level is going up from 4 to 5 to match up with Gagagigo's next form, which means that levels are a measurable and quantifiable factor in their world. Wonder if that's gonna become important at some point. But putting aside the strange world-building details, this card brings us into a new chapter. It is time for the Gagagigo to become Giga. But before we make that jump, Kazaki is giving off major Hojo vibes here, right? Like, I'm not going wild with this? In order to fight tremendous evil, he gained a formidable power through body reconstruction, but lost his heart and his redemption. No longer able to feel alive, even in battle, Gagagigo, a level 5 normal water reptile monster with 2450 attack and 1500 defense, throws themselves into combat, looking to find meaning in a world where sacrifice is not enough to defeat evil. Also, the brainwashing might be factoring in again. Looking to get their new warrior into battle as soon as possible, Kozaki loads up Gagagigo into a cannon and fires them towards the next battlefield, which we can see in Compulsory Evacuation Device, a normal trap card that has you targeting a monster on the field and returning it to the hand. It's kind of wild that there are so many impactful meta cards that feature Gagagigo like this. Compulsory Evacuation Device, Comp Evac to its friends, has been a very playable card on and off since its release. The flexibility of hitting any monster on the field means you can clear a path through your opponent's field, or gets one of your own monsters out of the way of some removal, or lets you use it again. And the fact that you can leverage this against extra deck monsters to prevent any graveyard or destruction triggers is awesome. Truly, when it comes to usages for Comp Evac, the sky's the limit. Which in this case might be literal. The powered trebuchet might be useful in some regards, but eventually you have to cross that dimensional barrier. Pin's still there, by the way. And so, at some point in the launch trajectory, Gagagigo is sent through the Monster Gate, a normal spell card that has you tributing a monster to excavate cards from the top of your deck until you find one that can be normal summoned or set and special summons it. Also, you send the other excavated cards to the graveyard. So it's a transmutation effect, turning one of your monsters into hopefully another better monster. It's like with reasoning, except you're guaranteed a monster, and you don't have to worry about your opponent knowing more about your deck than you do. And while these cards are usually relegated to being gimmicks, they were actually integral parts of the Infernoid machine. As many of their cards don't fit the requirement to be summoned off this, you would end up revealing a ton of them before you hit something like Decatron, filling your graveyard with fuel for future Infernoid plays. Oh, also, remember that Gagagigo is dual terminal cannon, which means that technically, that's all a flavor win. Upon reaching their destination, Gagagigo made a beeline for Freed's forces, looking to take them on in battle. A clash that's represented in the art of Draining Shield, a normal trap card that you can activate when an opponent's monster declares an attack. You target the attacking monster and negate the attack, and if you do, gain life points equal to that target's attack. This is one of the worst battle traps out there, as it doesn't solve the problem of the monster attacking you like Sakuretsu Armor or Dimensional Prison might. Nor does it keep the monster safe while enabling battle triggers like Waboku can. However, if your deck has life point gaining synergies, well, it still probably isn't worth running, but at least it's something. Oh, and a little fun fact from the lore book at this point, Gagagigo and Freed have a tab on their wins and losses, with the Lizard clocking in at 24 wins, while Freed is just a little higher with 26, showing that the Matchless General has a bit of an edge. And it's about to go to 27 wins if the placement of the next card is correct, and honestly, I think it's perfect. Death's Counterblow is a continuous trap card that destroys any monster that inflicts battle damage to any player's life points via a direct attack. That's right, it hits your own monsters, so be careful about being too aggressive. This is kind of a callback to Absolute End, now forcing the direct attacks to be a well-laid trap. A landmine ready to go off in your opponent's face. A much more devious tactic for a darker, edgier Gagagigo. Oh, there's also Ambush Fangs, a normal trap card that's Venom support. I'm not adding it to this timeline though. Venoms show up absolutely nowhere else in continuity, whether it be this strange otherworld or dual terminal itself. So sometimes you just gotta understand that these cards are representing monsters as they're being played in a game of Yu-Gi-Oh, as opposed to being part of the story. It's kind of like with Black Return. I am not acknowledging that Black Wings are part of dual terminal canon because of this. We have to draw the line somewhere. Even if the battle between Black Wings and Dragoonity would be f***ing bad! After ages of battle, growing in power, but never achieving either total victory or atonement, the soul of the evil reptile, who had once shown such promise in the realm of chivalry, falls to even greater depths of darkness. Gagagigo is a level 8 normal water reptile monster with 2950 attack and 2800 defense. His soul, long since collapsed, his body recklessly continues onward, driven by a lust for more power. He no longer resembles his former self, which I don't think is very fair to say. The only real difference between Giga and Gogiga is the awesome LED lighting that he's placed in his armor. Oh, and I guess the soulless stare, but come on, who hasn't died a little bit on the inside nowadays? We don't get to spend a lot of time with this era of Gagagigo, with their appearance consisting of only 2 cards. The first one is Memory of an Adversary, a normal trap card that you can activate when an opponent's monster declares an attack. You take damage equal to the attacking monster's attack, and if you do, banish that monster. And during the end phase of your opponent's next turn, special summon that monster to your side of the field. Now, this is another strange mashup of effects. If you squint at it, this card kinda looks like Dimensional Prism, well, with the banishing on attacking thing, but because it also causes you to take damage like the monsters attacking you directly, it's also kinda like Absolute End. It's funny seeing all these cards that I felt were only tied together by the presence of our lizard friend actually have some mechanical through lines. It's really cool. As for what's going on in the art, we have reached peak Berserk Gagagigo. We're seeing an old battle happening again, with Invader of Darkness and Empachi on one side, the Woodborg seemingly having fully been reconstructed in its original form, or it's just an entirely new Empachi, with Marauding Captain and Freed on the other side of the conflict. Freed seems to be too exhausted to fight anymore, but Gogiga Gagagigo comes out of nowhere to body Empachi and Invader of Darkness. However, despite this meaning a swift win for the soldiers, Marauding Captain sees that the soul of his former comrade is in danger, and thus casts away his sword in an attempt to talk down the rampaging behemoth. And the name of the card gives us even further insight into what's going on. Memory of an Adversary falls a little flat, but the original card has 2 names. Written in kanji, this card's name is Memory of a Rival, which is pretty similar to the name that we got in English, but the furigana version of the text reads Memory of a Friend. Marauding Captain isn't just trying to reach out to someone they met on the battlefield a few times and had a begrudging respect for, they're trying to reach the soul of a true companion, and this heartfelt plea reaches Gagagigo as they remember their oath of companionship, a normal trap card that you can activate if you control no monsters special summoned from the extra deck. You target a face-up monster your opponent controls that was special summoned from the extra deck and take control of it until the end phase, but you can't special summon during the turn you activate this card. I struggle to think of the utility this provides that would compel you to add this during deck building, but maybe a day will come around where a deck requires you to use extra deck monsters while simultaneously saying you can't make them, in which case this will fit right in. But until the game reaches that level of convolution, this can stay safely in your bulk bin. But it is a huge turning point for Gagagigo's development, with a true show of faith from an old friend. Not just the willingness to throw themselves into the way of a brutal attack, but to actually confront a comrade, to stand in their way, to risk being harmed by someone you have formed a bond with. The soul that was once consigned to darkness now rises once more, appropriately as Gagagigo the Risen, a rank 4 water reptile Xyz monster with 2950 attack and 2800 defense, requiring 3 level 4 monsters as material. Notably, this is not a power-up for Gagagigo. They have the same stats as their Gogiga form, but it does show a shift in mentality. Instead of trying to handle the burden of strength all on their own, now that power comes from being part of a team. Like with their last form, Risen Gagagigo doesn't appear very often so far, but one of their appearances is very infamous. Dimensional Barrier is a normal trap card that has you declaring a monster card type between Ritual, Fusion, Synchro, Xyz, or Pendulum. For the rest of the turn, neither player can special summon monsters of the declared type, also negate the effects of all monsters of that type while they're on the field. This lingering floodgate has been the bane of many a duel since its release 9 years ago. Its ability to shut off the functionality of any deck that focuses on one particular extra deck type was toxic. And I guess maybe Rituals and Pendulums got caught in there at some point. And because it was released prior to the release of Link monsters, they aren't an available choice here, making them uniquely immune to this card's influence. And as the support for normal trap cards grew, this card's strength did as well. Thankfully, just this last October, Dimensional Barrier was banned, taking another card out of the game whose sole function is to drain it of its fun. But part of me is saddened because the art here is actually really cool. Presumably, this takes place just after Gagagigo's soul has been purified, and now it seems they're being ripped away from their friends once again, being sucked up into a melting background and surrounded by glyphs reminiscent of synchro rings, but that can't possibly be the same thing. I think. But the real trick here is the barrier itself. Look closely, and you'll see that Gagagigo is behind what looks like a television screen with scan lines that seem to degrade into smaller squares, kind of like pixels as you go down the image. You can even see how Marauding Captain's shadow almost immediately falls onto the barrier to help define it. This is a piece that really does reward you for giving it a closer look. Freed is obviously startled by this, but even without seeing Marauding Captain's face, you can feel how distraught they are, pushing against the barrier, unable to come to terms with what's happening. Not to mention Gagagigo screaming and reaching out for help, for connection. The last time Gagagigo and Freed were separated by an impenetrable wall across dimensions, it was fraught with tension. Both sides worried the other was looking for a chance to strike. There was a truce, but an uneasy one. Now, both sides are terrified that this barrier will tear them apart again. They aren't worried what'll happen if they get too close, they're worried about being separated again. This is a very good piece of art, and it's a shame that it got attached to such a polarizing card. Our last example of Gagagigo the Risen is Overlay Capture, a normal spell card that has you targeting a face-up Xyz monster your opponent controls that has Xyz material and a face-up Xyz monster that you control. It detaches all Xyz material from the opponent's monster, and if you do, attach this card to your monster as Xyz material. Bit of a letdown there. If your opponent has like 3 material, you are still getting rid of all of them, but you only get 1 dinky material in return. It's like overlay regen with extra steps. And just like Ambush Fangs, there really isn't anything in here to help add it into the established timeline. In fact, I'd go so far as to say that this is probably non-canonical. Though, to be fair, this isn't something that can't necessarily happen. Swordbreaker isn't part of any established archetypes, so I could buy that they're a random resident of the multiversal expanse that makes up the dual terminal canon, whether it's in dual terminal itself or on the outskirt dimensions. But because it doesn't have ties with anything specifically, it's not like the association could mean anything. Though if it turns out they stole some of the weapons from the X-Sabers, that would be pretty funny. And with that, we've covered the Gagagigo timeline. From humble, rambunctious beginnings to uncertain futures, Gagagigo has been through it all, and I suspect we haven't seen the last of him. Where is Gagagigo the Risen being taken to? Will he run into any other derelict travelers across the dimensional byways? And will we see him take on another form in the future? Only time will tell, and this is the best place to find out. Keep an eye on the channel so that when we find out that Gagagigo gets taken over by a resurrected evil swarm virus at the behest of the Fabled, you'll be the first to know. Thank you all so much for watching, and a big thank you to the following. Today's episode is brought to you by Dragon Shield. Get the sleeves as strong as dragon scales and save 5% on your order by using the coupon code GoldenNova at checkout while helping out the channel. It was also brought to you by my lovely patrons, including this month's illustrious Quasar Commanders, Upstairs Media, and the Critic of Innocence, Nebula Navigators, 3rd Dynasty, Ada Basilisk, Adam Zajdel, Ancient Wizard, Andrew Newman, Battle Axe, Beastsman, Charlie Mercury, Chibi Gohan, Christopher Fuss, Clockswork, Comrade Eric, Frankie, Green Knight, Great Big Pillock, Groog, Hairbear, Harry the Ominous Benefactor, Iron Zero, Iskander 711, Carp, Marion James C. Picata, Meme King, Muse Clark, Neon Yami Nair, Orozco 09096, Panther J, Pat Boos, Rebel King Lucifer, Red Eyes Jackalow, Red Tail, RJ the Jank Monarch, Sonic 21 Blast, That One Dumbass and the Wizard Moose, Cosmic Crusaders Anthrak, A Random Pup, Blaze Rider, Blitzwolf, Brandon Guzman, Chaz Ghost, Christopher Fuss, again, Cool Trainer Dark, Dr. Entity, R.I.P., Eki Bullock, Edelweiss EN, Eva Padilla, Herbal D, Inblink, J.A. Flair, Julian Marquez, Kale the Dragon, Kryptonian Blurred, Lobomaru02, Manga Pages, Millennia Asta, Mr. Machina, Natia Lee Alexander, Nicholas Murphy, Not Algor, Obsidian, Rhyme Kairos, Rogue Wolf, Seraph SG, Shizuki Nijimura, Stephen Huntsman, The Legendary Raven, The Queen of Time, Tiger X2476, Tristan O'Meara, Zaldreca, Zephrath the Rock Thing, and Zentha, as well as all the lovely Starlight Explorers you see on screen now. If you'd like to help me in my journey to cover all of Yu-Gi-Oh's archetypes, get my videos early, be a part of these credits and other awesome perks, it would mean the world to me if you would check out the link to my Patreon in the description or consider joining as a YouTube member. And if you'd like to see another video about characters' long, winding path through the history of this game, check out this video where I cover the many facets of Die Greffer. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.